The US Civil War was the deadliest war in American history, and there was a nuance to it. Not only was it a fight for slavery or abolition, but it was also a fight versus states versus the federal government, Republicans versus Democrats. And to understand that story, we have to go back to before the transatlantic slave trade. You see, before the transatlantic slave trade expanded, slavery already existed in many parts of the world. European powers soon realized they could make enormous profits from crops such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton in the Americas. To supply labor for these plantations, millions of Africans were transported across the Atlantic in what became known as the Middle Passage. Many died during the journey, while those who survived faced harsh conditions on plantations throughout the Americas. In the American colonies, slavery became deeply rooted in the South. The invention of Eli Whitney's cotton gin in 1793 made cotton production far more profitable, increasing demand for enslaved labor. Meanwhile, northern states gradually abolished slavery as they industrialized, creating a growing divide between North and South. The divide widened through laws restricting enslaved people and political battles over slavery's expansion. The Missouri Compromise temporarily maintained balance between free and slave states, but the Fugitive Slave Act and Kansas-Nebraska Act reignited tensions. Violence in bleeding Kansas so that compromise was becoming impossible. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. Although he opposed the expansion of slavery rather than its immediate abolition, many Southern leaders saw his election as a threat. Southern states seceded and formed the Confederate States of America, or CSA, under Jefferson Davis. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. Lincoln called for volunteers. More states joined the Confederacy, and both sides prepared for what they expected to be a short conflict. The first major battle came at Bull Run, where Confederate forces held their ground before driving Union troops back toward Washington. The battle shattered hopes of a quick victory. While fighting spread through Missouri and Kentucky, Union forces secured most of the border states in the West. Ulysses S. Grant emerged as a rising commander after victories at Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, Shiloh, and Corinth. Meanwhile, Confederate hopes of expanding into the Southwest ended after the New Mexico campaign failed at Glorito Pass. Efforts to bring Kentucky into the Confederacy also failed after the campaign ended at Perryville. In the East, George McClellan repeatedly overestimated Confederate strength and moved cautiously during the Peninsula Campaign. His advance shattered, allowing Robert E. Lee to defend Richmond. Lee then defeated John Pope at Second Bull Run and invaded Maryland before being stopped at Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history. The battle allowed Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The Union also gained control of key coastal cities including New Orleans. In 1863, Lee invaded Pennsylvania but was defeated at Gettysburg, the deadliest battle of the war. Around the same time, Grant captured Vicksburg, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. At the dedication of the Gettysburg Cemetery, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, beginning with the famous words, "407 years ago our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." Meanwhile, Confederate General Braxton Bragg won a victory at Chickamauga but failed to destroy the Union Army. Grant soon broke the siege of Chattanooga and drove Confederate forces into Georgia, opening the path into the Deep South. By early 1865, Confederate resistance was collapsing. Petersburg fell, forcing Lee to abandon Richmond. Jefferson Davis fled the Confederate capital while Lee attempted to join forces with General Johnston. But Lee surrendered at Appomattox Court House. Grant treated Lee with respect, and when Union soldiers celebrated, he reminded them that the time had come for peace. Across the North, church bells rang with crowds celebrating. But only 5 days later, on April 14th, Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln died the next morning on April 15, 1865. Booth himself was killed on April 26th from a gunshot. That reminds me of what the Bible says. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place. For all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Matthew 26:52.